Hello and welcome, episode number 55 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelly, and as always, we've got a ton to talk about today. Before we dive into today's show, though, the social media plug is in order as always. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news by featured guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. If you want to follow my personal Twitter, it's at Chelney Andrew. Please rate the show if you enjoy listening. It means more to me than I can put into words, and as an incentive, I will give you a shout out on social media and on the podcast if you leave a rating, review, or follow the show. Every time you like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating on Apple Podcasts, follow it on Spotify, etc. It makes me feel great and helps the show out as well. Unless Chipotle or a local sushi place wants to sponsor me because I've given them more of my business over the years, and I'm willing to admit I don't make any money off the podcast. This is done out of love in my spare time. So when I see a new rating or review or share or whatever else, it makes me feel great. So please do that if you haven't already. Also, Chel Squared is part of National Podcast Network, a new network dedicated to NHL podcasts. Check the show out on there by going to nationalpodcast.network/Chel Squared. And though I am a SiriusXM employee, this podcast is not affiliated in any way with the company. The opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect the views of SiriusXM. If you're angry at my takes, direct them to me and me alone, please and thank you. Free agency season is upon us, and that means a lot of players moving to new teams. Who are the biggest winners and losers of this year's free agency? Lots of contracts handed out, but who handed out the ones that actually benefit the team the most? The Leafs, in their quest to get enough cap to sign Mitch Marner, have already made a couple of trades with the Senators and the Avalanche in the past few days. Will we see Mitch Marner get offer sheeted? What about Brayden Point? The Canadiens did it to Sebastian Aho, but the AAV was so small you kind of have to wonder if it was worth the hassle, since the Hurricanes will have no problem matching it. Rumors flying around social media today about the Islanders possibly offer sheeting Marner after losing out on Panarin to the Rangers. Interesting stuff from Lou Lamoriello, potentially. And lots of questions still to be answered, like how the Golden Knights will get under the cap. Is Jim Rutherford okay? Blink twice if you are Jim. And will Jim Benning ever stop doing dumb things? Well, listen, we already know the answer to that question, but it doesn't hurt to ask, right? We'll get into all of that, the poll question, and a whole lot more. Joining Chel Square this week is SiriusXM NHL host and NHL.com Toronto correspondent Dave McCarthy. Dave, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, and I must say before we begin, I love the name of the show. There's levels there. There's different nuance. Chel, your name with Chel, the league. I love it. That's really, really well done.
that puts a smile on my face. I really appreciate you saying that. I was back when I first was thinking of names for the show, I was throwing some things around, looking at, which names were taken, what was out there, what I could do possibly with Chel or something like that, and then just I figured, well, I got it in my name, and Chel is as people call it, Chel is a nickname for hockey. So here we go, Chel, and there's two Chels, so why not just call it Chel Squared? So I really appreciate.
It probably just came to you. Out of the blue, right? It's hard to come up with good names for shows, I find, without it sounding lame, or without it sounding forced. You hit that one perfectly.
I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I was looking at some other names, like as soon as it came to my head, I just ran with it. I'm like, this is it. This is so perfect for me and pretty much only me, because exactly. My last name isn't very popular. I don't think it's not a very common last name. So when I thought of it, I'm like, all right, this is it. I talked to my graphics guy, and we're like, all right, this is what we're doing. This is the name of the show.
Wow, this is a big show. You got a graphics guy. I'm looking forward to this. Big deal. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, he's I before I started the show, I just put out on Twitter like, hey, does anyone know a graphics guy? Does anyone? Well, because I needed a logo made, I needed a design made,
yeah.
And this person reached out to me, and I've worked with him ever since. He's made my logo, he's made my my banner. Whenever I have special episodes, like a few weeks ago, I had Kevin Westgarth come on. He made me a couple of graphics for that. And so I don't have him do stuff every week because that would be expensive. But for special
So,
episodes and stuff like that, I'll reach out to him and have something done.
wow. So what you're trying to say is you're sliding in kind of subtly that I'm not getting it graphic here. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I can't make one every episode because then it won't. Then it kind of loses its charm, right? I have to keep it to very, very rare instances.
Yeah, I know. I'm still working to get to that level. We'll talk.
I'll have my people call your people. So let's talk about the Maple Leafs here for a second. The Leafs have been very busy over the past few days trying to figure out a way to get enough cap to sign Mitch Marner. So they traded with the Senators first. They got Cody Ceci. They traded away Zaitsev and Connor Brown and a couple of other little pieces going both ways. But the big deal here was getting rid of Zaitsev's contract. But then the Leafs went and signed Cody Ceci to the same AAV just for 1 year instead of 5, which is a great deal if you're any other team because Zaitsev isn't good. But that doesn't help the Leafs right now because the AAV is the same. And then what they did a couple of days ago was trade with the Avalanche for Tyson Barrie and Kerfoot. They had to trade away Nazem Kadri and Calle Rosen. But this is a trade that I want to talk to you about because I have seen so many people on social media from both sides say that they either won or lost the trade. So to me, this is kind of a wash then it becomes because there's a lot of Leafs fans saying that they won the trade. There's a lot of Avs fans saying they won the trade. There's a lot of fans from both teams saying they lost the trade. I can't get a sense of which fan base is more excited about this trade. In your opinion, Dave, which team do you think won the Tyson Barrie Nazem Kadri trade?
Well, I think it was the type of situation where both teams were served well in the deal. At the end of the day, the Leafs needed to shed some cap space and give themselves some roster flexibility, and they were able to do that in both deals. With the Colorado deal, they were able to acquire a top-tier defenseman who shoots right, mind you, which is hard to find, that can play on their top pairing alongside Morgan Riley or with Jake Muzzing and play in their top 4. But he shoots right. He gives roster flexibility. And what people are forgetting is that in eating salary, the Maple Leafs now have a top-tier defenseman for $275 a year, which is actually representing a savings on what they paid Ron Hainsey a year ago at 3. So there's not only cap space found, but dramatic improvement on the back end. And this is not a shot at Ron Hainsey. I like Ron Hainsey. I thought he was a good player. I would have liked him back, but not at 3.5. But there's no denying that Tyson Barrie is a much better player at this stage in his career in terms of what he can offer you than Ron Hainsey. And to get him at a savings is a tremendous job by Kyle Dubas. They lock up Alex Kerfoot on a long-term deal at 3.5 as opposed to Nazem Kadri, who was at 4.5. So there's $1 million savings. So we're already at $1.2 million, $1.25 million. They moved Connor Brown. There's 2.2. So there is, and this is where I start to go down a rabbit hole when I try to do math in my head live on the radio here. But that's like 3.4, 3.45, almost 3.5. There's some cap savings with all of those deals, and you could argue that the Leafs did not get any worse, and certainly you could make the argument that they got better. So I think the deals were good, and if you look at it for Ottawa, I think it's a good thing as well. Ron Hainsey's a guy that I love having in my room. Was one of my favorite guys to talk to over the course of the last couple of years. He gives it to you straight. If you do not know what you were talking about, he will make sure that you know that you don't know what you're talking about. But he is great around young guys. You look at what he was able to do with Morgan Riley. Really helped to mold his game and to help him mature his game. A lot of the young guys in the room love being around Ron Hainsey, and that's the case now in Ottawa. They got a lot of young guys in that room. He will really help. Connor Brown, The guy showed he can score 20 goals in this league when he played the top six role 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, the 16-17 season. He didn't play in that role the last couple of years. Production went down, but he's going to go back into a top six role in Ottawa. It's a year away from becoming an RFA again. I think he's gonna have a great year. I think he's really gonna light it up in Ottawa this year. And in Colorado's case, one, they could afford to retain salary on Tyson Barrie to facilitate the trade because they've got all kinds of cap space. And in Nazem Kadri, they get a guy who is he's got some cost certainty for the next number of years. A second line center who can unquestionably play that role at 4 or 5. That's a really good bargain. So I think honestly the trade's worked out really well for both teams.
Cap Friendly has the Leafs cap space right now at just over $3.76 million. Now that is with Nathan Horton counted against the cap because you can't put him on LTIR until the first day of the season. So even if his $5.3 million, which expires at the end of next season, gets put on LTIR, that means, again, I'm not good at math here. I'm with you here, but that leaves around 9.2-ish, I would say, or just around there in cap space.
Yeah, and then remember some of the guys they signed on 1 year, $700,000 deals will end up in the minors, so that'll facilitate some room as well by the time the season arrives.
Right, but can the Leafs afford to wait that long? Can they afford to say, hey, we will wait with this contract until the season starts or around the time where they can afford to do that? Or is someone going to swoop in and force their hand on this one?
Yeah, I just don't see an offer sheet happening on Mitch Marner. I really don't. When you think about it, let's look at this logically, okay, here, Andrew? In order to get Mitch Marner to sign an offer sheet, right, because you don't just offer the player one, he actually has to sign it,
sure,
which means there has to be some degree of interest there in signing it. He's probably going to get around 10.5, 11 with the Leafs, his hometown team he grew up cheering for, a team that he is essentially king on, a city in which he is essentially king in, a city where if they were ever to win a championship, Mitch Marner, we think Kawhi's a big deal? I mean, Kawhi is a big deal. But anyone who wins a championship on the Maple Leafs, just forget it. Your life is made. You don't need money anymore. You should just give away all your money because you won't need it anymore. You won't have to pay for anything. That's the level that's the level you will be at if you win a championship in Toronto. So there's all of that going for the Leafs when it comes to retaining Mitch Marner. In order to get him to sign it and throw all that away, what do you think the number is going to have to be?
Pretty big.
Probably 13 or more to even consider signing it. Well, what happens if you sign Mitch Marner to an offer sheet of 13 or more? You get to make Mitch Marner the highest paid player in the history of the National Hockey League. And for that privilege, you get to give away 4 first-round picks. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense for the team looking to offer sheet Mitch Marner. Really good player. Outstanding player. Should he be made the highest paid player in the National Hockey League in the history of the league? I don't think so. So that's why I just don't see an offer sheet happening. Because if you offer sheet him to 10.5, and he signs it, Kyle Dubas is probably quite happy. Because now you've essentially done his business for him. Now all he has to do is match and away you go, because that's probably what you were going to sign him to anyway. I just don't see it happening.
That's what Carolina did, pretty much, right?
Right. I don't
Bergevin gave him that A point, whatever it was, AAV, but it was not. It wasn't big enough for the Hurricanes to say, we'll let you have him. 8 point, whatever. It was kind of like, oh well. Now our business is done. Thank you for doing the hard work. Now we'll just sign the dotted line, and then that's it.
Right. And then the other thing you have to contend with if you're Mitch Marner is, what is the perception of you if you sign an offer sheet at 10.5 with the Montreal Canadiens? What do you think that is going to do to your perception in this city? It's not like signing an offer sheet with the Anaheim Ducks or the Carolina Hurricanes. You're signing it with the Montreal Canadiens. That's going to be a tough sell to walk back into the Leaf room and have to answer, so wait a minute here, hang on. You were willing to go to the Montreal Canadiens? That's the tough sell. Another thing Mitch would have to contend with if he decides to sign that kind of an offer sheet. So I don't see it as a beneficial move, really, from any side, whichever the scenario is that plays out, for Marner, for the team, for the league. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
That's a very good point. I would love to see offer sheets, right? You would love to see offer sheets. I would say offer sheets are a rare breed, and they haven't happened for a while. And now we've finally seen one, and now it's like a drug. We've seen it once, and now we want to see it more and more and more and more. But the likelihood of that for Marner, at least, like you said, probably slim. But what about other players? What about Braden Point? What about, Patrick Laine is an RFA. Andrew Kopp is an RFA out in Winnipeg. There's a lot of other interesting talent out there that still need a contract. Is there any possibility that we might see an offer sheet that doesn't happen in Toronto?
Again, I think it's rare. Like the guys in Toronto that I was most concerned about seeing offer sheets to were Andreas Johnsson, Kasperi Kapanen, because you probably could have signed them to an offer sheet. They signed for essentially 3-4. You could have probably signed either guy to an offer sheet of 4.5, 5, and the compensation would not have been prohibitive. And they probably would have signed that because that's a significant increase over what they were going to get with the Leafs. That to me makes sense. But to sign a guy to an offer sheet where you're giving away 4 first-round picks, really the only team that would even slightly make sense to do is Colorado. Because I think, number one, you got to have the cap space, obviously. And 2, you have to have a young core around the guy that you're signing already in place, where the guy you're signing doesn't become the centerpiece of your team. He actually becomes an add-on piece, a complementary piece, so that he can enhance what you already have. Because if you don't have anything and you're going out and let's just use Marner as the example, and you're signing Mitch Marner to be your centerpiece guy, but then in doing so, you get to give away 4 first-round picks, you essentially become the Edmonton Oilers, right? Because now you've got your guy in Connor McDavid, but you don't have any picks to draft, to supplement, to put around the guy so that in a year or two, there's a young core around the guy to play with. That's Edmonton's problem right now. They've got their guy, but they might as well have been offer sheeting guys since drafting McDavid, because what they've done is with the picks they could have given up, they've burned them anyway in terms of how they've drafted and gotten nothing for them. And now you see what kind of a situation they're in, where they have the one guy, but they don't have anybody around him. And, you've got a great guy who gets 100 points every year, but you never make the playoffs. So that's why I just don't see offer sheeting guys at that elite level as a good course of action to try to build your team. It doesn't make sense to me as an option.
Well, McDavid didn't sound super happy after the ending of last season, which how can you be if you're the only really amazing talent on your team? McDavid, obviously a generational player, and then everybody else is not nearly as good. It's tough to be happy in a situation. Well, that leads me to my poll question for this week is, who is the biggest free agency winner? Now I put 4 options. Of course, Twitter only lets me put 4 options, and the 4 that I put on this poll was the Rangers, the Panthers, the Preds, and the Stars. This poll got around 90 votes so far, and I want your answer to this poll before I let you know what Twitter thinks is the biggest free agency winner so far.
I say Florida.
And why? Why would you say that?
Okay, I thought I was going to get the data first here, but all right, I'll give you my response first. Florida needed a goalie. More than anything, they needed a goalie. 2 years ago, I picked them to be a playoff team. They ended up falling 1 point short. Last year, I picked them to be a playoff team. They ended up coming up a little short, but both years it was because They didn't get consistency in net. Roberto Luongo, Hall of Fame player in my mind, but he's at the end of his career. He couldn't stay healthy, couldn't stay in the net. And when he went out early in the season both years, they got behind the 8 ball, and James Reimer wasn't able to provide the type of goaltending they needed. So, did they pay a little bit more money than they probably would have liked to acquire Sergei Bobrovsky? Probably. But desperation costs money, right? And I think that was their last piece that they really need to take a step forward in really what is a tough Atlantic Division. I think, Sergei Bobrovsky is a guy that should be able to provide consistent net minding throughout the season. It should keep them in the hunt. Now, I talked to Alex Barkov toward the end of the season when they rolled through town here in Toronto. I think it was the end of March, mid-March. And Alex Barkov's a guy that doesn't get enough credit for how good of a player he is around the league. I asked Troy Bauer that question that same day, and he was like, no, nobody talks about Alex Barkov, but man, do we know in this room what kind of a player he is. So I said to Alex, I said, look, is it getting frustrating? You continue, not unlike McDavid, to have great individual year after great individual year, and yet it doesn't translate into playoff success. And he said, a little bit it does, but he said, quite honestly, we should be a playoff team. The guys we have in this room, we should be a playoff team. So he was frustrated that it hadn't happened yet because he believed that the pieces around him were good enough to contend for playoff spot, and I agree. They've got some really nice pieces. Aaron Ekblad is a guy that should be better. I think if they have some semblance of net minding, he will be better because every time he makes a mistake, it won't be glorified into turning into a goal. You'll have a guy that'll bail you out. All the best defensemen in the league make mistakes. Drew Doughty, Morgan Riley, Victor Hedman, they make mistakes. They get goalies that help them out every now and again. They never had that in Florida. Jonathan Huberdeau is a really nice piece. They've got a good group in place. The issue is that they haven't been able to get a save. So I think that in correcting that issue, Sergei Bobrovsky will go a long way, and that's why I think Florida's the winner.
Panthers, in the poll at least, are third in the standings. The Panthers have 15% of the vote. The Stars have 16% of the vote. The Preds have just 4% of the vote. The Rangers, the clear favorite, at 65% of the vote. Of course, signing the Breadman to one of the largest contracts in NHL history. But again, this is not...
Breadman gets paid.
Yeah, Breadman gets paid. That's absolutely right. But I feel like this isn't talked about more in terms of the contract itself, right? This is not a Bobby Holik situation. This is not a Chris Drury situation. This is a 27-year-old super elite winger, right? The AAV is big. I think he's the second highest paid player in the NHL right now, behind McDavid. But he is so good that it warrants this kind of contract, at least in my opinion, for the Rangers. And they also have the space to do it. They have around $8 million right now to sign the remaining RFAs like Jacob Trouba and those guys. But for Panarin, this is such a big move for this team. And the trope is, Glenn Sather signs all these big names to these big contracts and they don't work out, yada, yada. Well, one, it's not Glenn Sather anymore. Two, it's Jeff Gordon. Glenn Sather right now is the president. He's still there. He's still being paid by the team, but he's not the main guy working the phones right now. That's Jeff Gordon.
Well, yeah. Let me just stop you right there, Andrew. It's not even Glenn Sather. He's an advisor now. It's actually John Davidson, right, who came in and took over. So Sather still has, I guess, some voice in the matter. But it's John Davidson and Jeff Gordon who are doing the business now, and you have to wonder if there was some connection there with Panarin coming from Columbus and John Davidson, who was Columbus's president last year. If I was a Columbus fan, I'd be like, oh, wow, I'm not really too pleased with that.
I would agree, because the Columbus Blue Jackets, so we'll talk about this a little later, were one of the biggest losers of free agency. Huge losers. They lost their best player. They lost their best forward, their best goalie. They got Gus Nyquist in free agency, but does that really mask the situation at hand? It really doesn't. Although it would be, he's a good player. He's gonna give him some points. But at the end of the day, it's the reason why Panarin got this huge contract is because, well, he's one of the best players in the league. And Gus Nyquist is a good player, but is he one of the best players in the league? Probably not. So the Columbus Blue Jackets definitely one of the losers in free agency. But for the Rangers, right? I mean, this is 18 months ago they sent out the letter, and and 18 months later they are potentially in the hunt for the playoffs. I mean, this is one of the quickest turnarounds I've ever seen in a rebuild, and this makes me super happy because I'm a Rangers fan, but from a, just from a hockey fan perspective, this is insane. This is almost insanity. 18 months ago, the Rangers were down and out. They were a forgotten team, basically. This was a team that was faltering with AV and that we couldn't get anything done. And then here, there's a lot of questions moving forward. Less than 2 years later, they signed Panarin. They traded for Adam Fox, traded for Jacob Trouba, got Kaapo Kakko, Vitaly Kravtsov's now coming up as well. There's so many young and great pieces with this Rangers team right now that you have to. Is this the fastest rebuild in NHL history? I feel like it might just be.
Well, they put themselves in a really good position. I'm not going to go as far to say that their rebuild is over with.
Sure.
Because they still got to show me something on the ice, but they put themselves in a great position. I think at the end of the day, though, it's really going to come down to what sort of production they get out of their young players. Filip Chytil, Elias Anderson, Brett Howden, Pavel Buchnevich. What will they be able to contribute this year? Because I think they're going to need a lot from them in order to take a step and make the playoffs. You can't rely on the bread man alone. Zibanejad, Kreider. You can't rely on them alone. Nemestikov, he's a guy that I think needs to have a really big year, the type of year that he was having a couple of years ago in Tampa. But if they can get production from their young players, and I always say this, if you can have, Anderson, Howden, Chytil, Buchnevich is going to get some money. But if you can get those first three guys who are essentially $800,000, $900,000 players playing like $6 or $7 million players, that's when you really take a step forward. That makes a difference in a cap world. It's when you get guys who are $7 million players, like a lot of folks out in Edmonton who are playing like $900,000 players. That's where you don't make the playoffs. But they're in a really good position right now, and that's part of the reason why they could go out and acquire Panarin, because they've got, we were talking about it a few minutes ago, a young core already in place that they're confident in New York. That they're going to be able to take a step forward, and that they're going to be able to be the guys, and that Panarin will be a nice complementary piece to their young players. It's not like it's not like they're destitute and they're bringing in Panarin and saying, geez, let's pay this guy all of the money and hopefully something happens here. They've got pieces around them. Now it's up for those young guys to contribute. But I don't necessarily have a problem with the Panarin deal, because he has shown himself to be dynamic everywhere he's been. He's still young. He's got elite level talent. I like the comparison that you drew with Bobby Holik when they signed that deal a number of years ago, albeit not in the cap world, but that just never made any sense to me. And here's a funny anecdote about Bobby Holik, who once told me, look, if you put me on your first line and you pay me $10 million a year, I'm happy, but we don't make the playoffs. If you play me on your third line, we win Stanley Cups. And that's the type of player that Bobby Holik was, right? In New Jersey, he was a third line, second line center at times. He was not the guy. He was behind other players. They won. When you try and take a guy, move him up the lineup, pay him all that money, say, well, he can be a first. No, doesn't work that way. And that's not what they're doing here in Art Panarin. He's a guy that has been a first liner everywhere he's been. He's produced everywhere he's been. He's being paid like it now. He's got to continue to produce, but I like the chances at 27.
And I would agree with that for sure. And going back to the Panthers for a second here, are you at all concerned about Bobrovsky's contract at all? He was very good in the playoffs, but there were stretches in the regular season where he didn't look great. He ended up with a pretty decent 913 save percentage. He kind of made up for his shoddy play towards the end of the season. But are you at all concerned about Bobrovsky's contract?
Yeah, like I said, it's more money than I'd like to pay. But at the end of the day, as I said, desperation costs money, right? And am I more content with Sergei Bobrovsky in my net if I'm the Florida Panthers for the next number of years than I would be if Roberto Luongo came back for another year? The answer to that question is yes. I mean, the guy's won a couple of Vezina trophies. We know he can stop the puck, and he's not old. Like, he's still got a lot of years left. Did he play up to his standards all of last year? No, but it was a weird situation when he essentially came out at the beginning of the year and was like, look, peace at the end of the year. I'm not coming back. There's got to be a real weird dynamic in the room, around the team, around the city, when you make that kind of an announcement. And at the end of the day, he played well. They made the playoffs. They dispatched Tampa Bay. I mean, he played pretty good. So, if they can get that level of goaltending out of him, it's better than what they've got, and it puts them in a position to make the playoffs. And there really weren't a ton of other. I mean, not that he's even really a guarantee, but he's as close to a guarantee as there was on the UFA mark in terms of goalies this year. And based on his resume, that's what he cost. So, again, probably a little bit more money than they'd like to pay, but that's what it costs to get a guy in who. As Alex Barkov suggested, the last guy that they need in order to make a push for the playoffs in the Atlantic Division.
Well, he did leave a team that is now pretty much, I don't want to say reeling here, but there's more questions than answers right now in Columbus. You've got, obviously, Panarin's out, Bobrovsky's out. Now you've got to start filling holes. And DailyFaceoff.com has Gus Nyquist on the first line with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Cam Atkinson. And, I mean, Gus Nyquist is probably fit better on a second line, potentially maybe even third line role if the team's deep enough. But first line role for Gus Nyquist is a concern, I think, from just a paper perspective. Obviously, we haven't seen what he can do on the ice in Columbus as of now, so we can't speculate, oh, well, he's not fitting in with these players. We don't know that yet. But in terms of just a paper a transaction, with seeing what the lines are, that concerns me. That it is concerning to me, at least for a little bit, that Gus Nyquist is on the first line. That could be Nick Foligno, it could be Bjorkstrand down the road. Obviously, we don't know that yet. It's July 5th. There's a lot of time to be had here. The blue line is still good. You have Werenski, Jones, Murray, and Savard. The bottom six with Kukin and Nudivara could be potentially a little bit better, but the blue line right now is Columbus's strength, I would say. The goaltending situation is probably the biggest question mark in the entire National Hockey League right now, because is Jonas Korpisalo good enough to handle starting position, starting caliber games, or is he? Is this going to be a 1A, 1B with Merzlikins? How good is he? I know Columbus is very high on Elvis Merzlikins, but day one, is he going to be good enough to play 35 games in the National Hockey League? We don't know that yet. So for me right now, looking at Columbus's roster, I have more questions than I do answers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's fair to say. I mean, just looking at the goaltending, kind of almost traded the Florida situation to Columbus, right? Where the last couple of years, Florida was hoping that they were going to be able to piece together their goaltending, that Bobby Lou would be able to stay healthy and play like he did 7-8 years ago, and that James Reimer could provide a semblance of competent net minding. Now that's kind of in Columbus. There's a lot of hope there. I mean, we saw Jonas Korpisalo play at times the last couple of years. He's been pretty good, but now he's the guy, right? Like, that's a different kettle of fish if you're a netminder in the National Hockey League, where suddenly you're being asked to play 50, 55, 60 games. That's where guys get exposed. Does he have the mental makeup to play that type of a position? Does he have the the physical stamina to play that much. I don't know. And there's hope there. When you're hoping in nets, that's typically not a recipe for success. Especially when you look up the lineup and you say, where are we going to get goals from? That's kind of an issue right now in Columbus. And are we going to have to win a lot of games 2-1, 3-2? I think the answer to that question is probably going to be yes. I love the fact that they loaded up and they went for it. You have to wonder how much that was John Davidson, who knew he was probably going to be out the door anyway, and to use an old baseball reference, was that kind of an Alex Anthopoulos from 2015 where he knew he was going to be out the door. So, we'll just sell the farm and we'll get Price and we'll get Tulo and we'll go out and get all these guys and take a run for it, and I'm going to be out anyway. Is that what they did in Columbus? I don't know, but they certainly loaded up, and now they've lost all those guys that they went out and got, Duchesne and Zingle, and they lost their own UFAs in Panarin and Bobrovsky. And what they're left with is, there's some nice pieces there, but, Cam Atkinson, how good can he be as sort of that lead dog? Brandon Dubinsky is no one's number one center on a great team. Gustav Nyquist is nobody's top liner on a great team. Nick Foligno, no one's top liner on a good team. Love the guy, but, let's be honest, at this point in his career, really good second line center, probably better third line center. Alex Wenberg, can he be an engine or can he be, is he a guy that needs to play with somebody? Boone Jenner is the type of guy that's an energy guy. He's not a driver. Riley Nash, guy who plays low in your lineup. Josh Anderson, a good player, but we'll see. Can he be an engine? I don't know. Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to have to really, really take a step forward and become, and not that he's not already a very good player, but he's going to have to become an elite player in this league. There's a ton of responsibility on him right now. But, man, we're going up and down that lineup, and there's not a lot of, we're going to get this from that guy and that from that guy. There's a lot of, I hope we're going to get this from that guy, and I hope that guy can step up and control. And that's a really tough type of recipe in order to have success.
Another team that, and you're absolutely right, I completely agree with you. Another team that I think is a huge loser here is the Pittsburgh Penguins, because now you traded Phil Kessel to the Coyotes for a prospect in Pierre-Olivier Joseph and Alex Galchenyuk, but you've also lost Phil Kessel. And apparently the rumors are that relationship between Phil Kessel and Jim Rutherford did not end so well, according to what both sides have said about each other, which is pretty interesting to see that process kind of go down. The Penguins also traded Olli Maatta. They also gave Brandon Tanev, a guy who had a career year of, count them, 29 points last season, to a 6-year, $3.5 million deal yearly. I don't want to question Jim Rutherford's health. I hope he's okay, but can we get a confirmation here? Because this is not good. The Penguins right now, according to Cap Friendly, have just a hair under $1.6 million of cap space right now to sign. Patrick Hornquist is 32 years old. He is slowing down rapidly. $5.3 million deal every year for 4 more seasons. Alex Galchenyuk is a UFA after this season. You got Matt Murray needing a new contract after next season. You have a lot of players right now that are either taking up a lot of cap space or will take up more cap space either next year or 2 years down the line. And the Penguins, they didn't really get better in this deal. Sure, some of the Penguins fans will say, "Oh, well, Kessel kind of disappeared for stretches at a time. He didn't score at even strength for a stretch. I think it was in January and February or whenever it was. And there were times where he wasn't present, this and that. I mean, at the end of the day, he was a point of game player, right? And obviously, he has its faults, like everybody else. Everybody has their own faults, and that season wasn't particularly great for Phil Kessel. Sure, I completely agree with that. That's fine. but he's still a point a game. Think of it this way: he had a down year, and he was still a point a game player. And you trade him away for Alex Galchenyuk, who should be better than we see in his stat sheet. And you sign a bottom six guy to that ridiculous contract. You trade away Ole Mata, who kind of is slowing down because of his health problems more than anything else. He's still a young guy, so he still has time, but he's not as good as he once was because of his concussion history and his overall injury history. But overall, you look at the Pittsburgh Penguins and you think, is this all you got? Is this the team moving forward? Because if it is, I'm not a fan of it.
It's interesting to see how it played out. My biggest concern with Pittsburgh is they don't have any 19, 20, 21-year-olds that are really pushing, right, for a job right now. And that's where the league is nowadays. You need that wave coming in that you've drafted and developed that's playing for essentially free, that can really contribute in their lineup. And that's kind of the issue that they have right now. I mean, I don't mind their team up front. I think it had come to the point where it was time to move on from Phil. I think he wanted to move on. And when you have a guy that clearly wants to move on, he can become ornery. It can become a bit of a difficult situation. So I think the time was right to move on. They saved some money over the short and long term. And in Alex Galchenyuk, you get a guy that is going to be an unrestricted free agent a year from now. And you're going to play him with probably Evgeny Malkin. And if he can't play to the level that everybody thinks that Galchenyuk can get to alongside Evgeny Malkin, well, maybe ice hockey isn't for you. I mean, quite honestly, right? Like, it's put up or shut up here for Alex Galchenyuk. He should be motivated, and he's going to be in a great position to succeed. I think they'll make the playoffs. I really do. Any team that has Crosby and Malkin up the middle of the ice, Jake Gensel's still a dynamic player. Galchenyuk, like I said, should be motivated. I like Nick Bukestad in the third line role. I think he's a really good player. He can play up the lineup too if need be. Brian Russ is a competent player. Jared McCann's a competent player. Dominic Cahoon, I think there's probably more there for him to give. He had a nice looking year in Chicago last year. So I think he should be able to push a little bit. He might be that type of guy that I was talking about, maybe a little older than 1920s, 24, but he's playing at 925 next year. So he's a guy that I think should be able to push and contribute a little bit more than people might expect. And then on D, they're okay. Like Letang, Dumoulin isn't bad. Justin Schultz. They need more out of Jack Johnson, that's for sure. He didn't have a good enough year last year. If they can get him,
not a great career overall. Yeah, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, you're right. So if they can get more out of him, it's going to be a tough ask though at 32, 33. But I'll put it this way: he's played better in his career than he did last year. He needs to get back to his career mean. If he can do that, I think they'll be okay. I don't think they're a cup contender per se, but I think they'll challenge for a playoff spot.
I will never get over Jim Rutherford trading for Jack Johnson and then having the entire fan base come at him because Jack Johnson is an overpaid, not good hockey player. And then Jim Rutherford said, "Oh yeah, we'll take a look at this." He doubled down, traded for Eric Branson at the deadline, and said, "Hey, how do you like me now? Now we got two of those guys that you don't like on our team." And that's a weird thing to do if you're a general manager. It's a weird thing to do, and I don't like it, and I'm sure the Penguins fans don't like it either. The Brendan Tanev contract, again, 29 points, career high, and you give him 6 years? At how much money? Can we... Jim, like... all right, please tell me you're okay.
See, here's the thing. I like Eric Branson. I think he's a nice player. I'd love a guy like him on my bottom pair. I just don't like the number he's at. 4 is too much. If he was playing for 2, you'd love Eric Branson. There's no reason why you wouldn't want a guy like that on your team, on your bottom pairing, who can lean on you a little bit, you can kill penalties, but not at 4. right? That's where it becomes an issue to me.
I just wouldn't have him on my team, to be honest with you. I don't like his game. His analytics are atrocious. I mean, I don't know how much you subscribe to analytics. And again, I think
Not
there's
a big analytics guy.
Are you?
No.
No. Is there a reason for that? Do you think they just don't have a place in hockey, or what's your reasoning?
No, I just think that you miss too much when you look only at numbers. You can't chart the game on a graph. You need to understand that there's more to it than just what a guy's pie chart looks like or a guy's line curve looks like. A guy like Eric Goodbranson, if you're playing him in the right role at 12 minutes a night on your third period and killing penalties, there's value in that. Look at the team that won the cup this year, St. Louis. Not a lot of analyticians on that team in terms of the players whose analytics were jumping off the chart. But what did they do come the third and fourth round? They leaned on you. They made it tough. They made it unpleasant. They wore you down. And the river hockey players were out of the playoffs by that point. So there's a place for it, but it can't be the be all end all. And to completely overlook the need for any semblance of I'm trying to find the right word, because so many words nowadays are trigger points for discussions that go the wrong way.
Hashtag grit, hashtag glue guy, hashtag locker room guy.
No, glue guy. I don't buy that, because you got to be able to play. If you're good in the room and you can't play, you might as well stay there. But you need guys that can wear you down a little bit. I think that's what I'll say. You don't see teams of river hockey players win the Stanley Cup. Look at the last number of teams that have won, right? St. Louis, Washington, not a pleasant group to play against. No, right? Pittsburgh, again, some tough customers on that team. You don't see the teams that just dart around the ice and never touch you and play pond hockey all day long and merge. So that's why I think that you look at Dallas. Roman Polak was a guy that couldn't play in Toronto. People couldn't stand the guy. He's playing with Miro Heiskanen this year in Dallas. Jim Montgomery couldn't stop going on about Roman Polak. And Miro Heiskanen was a Calder finalist. Should have been a Norris finalist. He was that good. And he played with Roman Polak most of the year. So, that's all I'll say. It seems like there are certain guys that get overlooked, and there's still a need for those type of players in the league. Got to be able to play, but in the right role, I think there's room for some guys that lean on you a little bit.
Now, can you imagine how good Heiskanen would be if there was an even better defenseman next to him? That's all. This is where I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here and kind of say that no one is, at least to my knowledge, the people that do the analytics and are the number crunchers here. First of all, they watch the notion that, I'm not saying you think this or people like you suggest this, but a lot of people say, well, you got to watch the games. You can't. First of all, right, the people that do the analytics watch more hockey games than both of us combined. I mean, they rewatch games. They rewatch games a bunch of times to make sure that what they have is correct and everything that all these stats are good to go and all of that. And so one, I'm not saying again that you suggest this, but overall the notion that just watch the games, you don't need analytics. Well, they watch the games, but it's also, I don't think anyone that actually does analytics or likes analytics suggests that we should only do analytics. It has to be a tandem thing. Sure, games aren't won on paper. That's why we didn't give. That's why the Lightning didn't win in April, right? It's no one wins on paper. But at the end of the day, analytics provides a good other angle as to what works and what doesn't work out there on the ice. Like Panarin, right? Panarin is you are not a fan of analytics, and yet you say he is one of the best players in the league, and yet the analytics support that. The analytics support that he is one of the best players in the league, and analytics will show you in which situations and where he does well and where he fits best and all of that, going off of what he's done in prior situations. So overall,
so that's where I push back a little bit. I mean, to me, if we're really going to use analytics to find competent players, let's use a different example from Art Panarin. Like, no kidding, the guy gets 90 points every year. I can tell you he's a good player. But that's where I think analytics need to come into focus. Where can I find guys that, maybe you're down in my lineup or down in someone else's lineup that might be able to move up my lineup if I was to go out and acquire them. That's where I think they can come in handy, and I think they do to an extent. But I guess, see, my viewpoint on analytics gets skewed a little bit because I'm not saying that it's useless, but what I'm saying is everybody seems to equate analytics to only skill. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's a place for analytics, but I also don't think you can build a team that is purely based on skill, especially down in your lineup. Smaller water bug type guys that flit around the ice, but don't wear you down. I think over the course of a 2-month Stanley Cup playoff tournament, you come up lacking that way. In the regular season, wonderful. Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of no-hitters in the regular season. But if you don't have a third and fourth line that are willing to make you pay a price, and a few defensemen who are going to make you think twice about going into their corner, you're going to have a hard time. Like, look at Boston's fourth line this year. What was Noel Acciari and Sean Corrali's analytics like? I don't know. Was it good? Because maybe it was great. If it was, that's awesome. But I can tell you, man, they were pains in the butt because they wore you down against the Leafs. They dominated the Leafs.
I'm gonna argue with you for a little bit here. Respectfully disagree. No one's arguing, right? We're not arguing. Respectfully disagreeing.
We're disagreeing with decency.
Right. Exactly. Just because you have good analytics doesn't mean that you're not hitting anybody. You know what I mean? Analytics should. One of the positives of analytics is, if you're a defenseman, right, analytics shows how good you are at defending, right? You take a look at the common box score of an NHL game, right, and you see what? You see goals, assists, plus minus, which is, I think, a pretty irrelevant stat, but you don't see how many times a defenseman has stopped an entry or let the opposition go into their zone. You don't see that. That's just one part of analytics, right? And you don't see that on the stat sheet. You don't see how good a defenseman was at their core job on a average stat sheet, and that's what. Analytics is such a big term because there's so many different aspects of analytics. There's you can map it out. You can also analytics is just, hey, how many zone entries did you allow in this game? That's also analytics because it's not a quote unquote common stat. So it for a defenseman, right? For example, for Eric Branson and Jack Johnson as two examples, the analytics show that, hey, they're just not good at defending their own zone, and they allow a lot of entries, and they just don't defend their own goal well. That's what the analytics show, and that's why a lot of people are against Jack Johnson and Eric Branson playing a lot of minutes or any minutes at all, is because they have a tendency to not defend well, and that's what the analytics show, and that's. Again, I don't think anyone is suggesting only look at the graphs and don't look at anything else. I don't think anyone is saying that. But if you take a look at the overall thing that is analytics, the overall entity, you take a look at, again, Eric Branson and Jack Johnson, and you take a look at, this shows that they just don't defend their own end well. At the end of the day, if they can't defend their own goal well, then we've got bigger problems.
No, that's fair. I guess what I would say is, ideally, you'd like a guy whose analytics are fantastic, but also makes you pay a little bit of a price. And that's basically all I'm saying, is that if I'm building a team, the way I'm prioritizing my team is I need obviously all kinds of skill. I can't have guys in the lineup that can't play, but I need to find some guys that make you pay a price. And I don't think enough people believe in how important it is to have guys who are willing to play mean, nasty hockey in May and June. And I think that shows every year. The teams that win, that ultimately go deep and win, are the teams that play mean, nasty hockey. You don't win playing pond hockey in the playoffs.
Well, just because you have good analytics doesn't mean you don't hit. You know,
no,
you could be like you said, nasty and dirty in May and June, and still be good analytically. You could still defend your own zone well, or drive possession well, and still be one of those players that people don't want to touch. I think it goes hand in hand. Again, there's a difference between being a tough player to play against, quote unquote, but not being able to defend your own zone, versus being a tough player to play against because you can't get into the offensive zone when you need to, because the defenseman that's at the blue line stops you every time.
Right. See, here's the other thing, though. There are other players that, I'm told their analytics are really good, that I just watch, and it's like, I can't have this guy on the ice. Like, for instance, and I hate to be pointing out someone individually because it's not very nice, but like Marty Marincin here in Toronto, we are told his analytics are really good. People in the analytics community love this guy. Like, I'm sorry, this guy's just not a National Hockey League defenseman. He's shown me that for 4 years now, yet he keeps finding a way to sign contracts. If you want to tell me that you'd rather have a guy like Marty Marincin on the ice than Eric Goodbranson in 9 to 12 minutes, like, I'm sorry, we're just not going to agree there, because you watch Marincin play, the guy turns the puck all over the place, constantly flubs passes, constantly gets spun around his own end, and he doesn't make you pay a price, yet somehow I'm told his analytics are good. So that's part of the disconnect there that I just don't quite understand sometimes.
We'll agree to disagree there. Again, I don't have the analytics in front of me, so I can't tell you exactly, how good Marty Marincin's stats are and this and that. Analytics are anyway versus Eric Branson. I don't have that in front of me. And I'm not a math person, so I won't be able to tell you that at all anyway. So that's... I can't tell you for sure, but I will say that if push come to shove and you ask me, if you have a choice between Marty Marincin and Eric Branson as your 6D, who would you want? Mm-hmm. And I pick Eric Branson, I won't be too happy with myself personally. And that's, again, this is a agree to disagree thing. It's at the end of the day, neither of us are general managers, so this is all just we're just talking here. So until we are GMs, in which case we will reconvene down the road. Yeah. But as of right now, we're not general managers. One quick thing here, before I let you go, a couple of other teams that I want to talk about super quickly here is the Dallas Stars and the Vancouver Canucks. The Stars I have as a winner, and the Canucks I have as a loser. The Stars needed depth very badly. They didn't have a whole lot of that, as shown in the later parts of the season and in the playoffs, where they needed secondary scoring. They didn't really get it. And now you have Joe Pavelski in the mix. Obviously, Zuccarello is a Rangers legend. I love the guy. He was great in New York. He was great in Dallas when he played. Now he signs that big contract in Minnesota. But now you got Joe Pavelski in the mix, right? Now you have Corey Perry to a one-year deal who's in the twilight of his career, sure, but still adds a little bit of secondary scoring to a team that needed it. Now, Andrei Sekera, who was bought out by the Oilers, now a part of the Dallas Stars defense. That I think he's a pretty okay. He's not fantastic. He used to be better. Obviously, now he's coming off pretty lengthy stretches of not playing time. But now you got Ben Bishop in goal, who, in my opinion, should have won the Vezina. You take Louis Domingue was what, 21-5 in Tampa Bay this season. He was atrocious. He was awful in Tampa Bay, and he won 21 games this season.
That's why they went and got Curtis McElhinney, I guess.
I'm not saying he's much better than Domingue. I'll tell you that much. I'm not trying to hate on Domingue personally. I've never met the guy. He could be he's probably a great person, but in terms of his play last season, he was awful, and yet he won 21 games. I'm not taking anything away from Vasilevsky because obviously he's a great goaltender. But if Louis Domingue could do it, I mean, come on. Ben Bishop, on the other hand, was unbelievable, and in my opinion should have won the Vezina, but that's neither here nor there. The Dallas Stars, in my opinion, are one of the winners. Not the biggest winner per se, but a smaller winner.
I agree. I like the moves they made in acquiring Zuccarello at the deadline last year, and in getting Pavelski. That was huge because their biggest issue, I think, was that they lacked length in their lineup. They had a great top line with Ben and Sagan and Radulov, but if they weren't scoring, they had a hard time shooting the puck in the net, and that was their issue. Now, in getting Zuccarello and getting Pavelski, got a couple of guys who can shoot the puck in the net, and it provides some length to their lineup, takes some of the responsibility off Ben and Sagan, who at times last year went through a bit of a tough time, as Jim Lights reminded us around January. So now that won't necessarily be the case, and I think when you couple that with Ben Bishop and the way their defense is shaping up with Heiskanen, who's just a tremendous player, I think they're in a really good position right now in Dallas. I like those moves a lot.
And last thing here, another loser that I have on my board is the Vancouver Canucks, who gave Tyler Myers a big contract. It wasn't nearly as big as some of the reports were before he signed it. Still bigger than I would like. He is a 5'6" defenseman at best. And if you want to give a bottom pairing defenseman that kind of money, well, then we've got bigger problems than that. Mm-hmm. He's tall. That's about it. Because here's the thing, right? He's tall, and some people say, oh, well, look at Chara. Chara is tall. Chara is so tall, he uses his length as advantage and all that. Chara knows how to do that. Tyler Myers is just tall. There's the issue, right? Yeah. Tyler Myers is a huge individual, but doesn't really use that size to his advantage. Meanwhile, Chara has perfected the ability to use his size and his strength to his ability. Obviously now not as well as he used to, but he's still capable, more than capable of playing defense, at least at a top 4 role. Chara now, I mean, I maybe better at a 5 spot now for Chara, but still, I would rather have Chara than Tyler Myers, even though Tyler Myers is about a decade plus younger. Tyler Myers is tall, and that's about it for Tyler Myers.
He never looked better than he did when he was in Winnipeg, when he was playing in a 5-6 role, and he was just killing penalties, and he wasn't being overexposed, and he wasn't forced to deal with other teams' top lines on a nightly basis like he did when he was in Buffalo, when he didn't look so good. So, to me, that contract was a bit, how shall we say, ooh, okay, I don't know if I do that. So, I mean, there's that. I don't think that was the best move per se, but time will tell. I guess I like Vancouver, the way they're shaping up. I like the Miller acquisition. I think he's an underrated guy who can play in your top 6 and can be a dynamic player, and I think that'll really help them out. I think Elias Pettersson's going to be, if not already, just an absolute stud in Vancouver. Bo Horvat is an underrated guy. So they've got 2 really, really quality players there. Brock Besser obviously is the type of guy that I think will be a dynamic goal scorer. The question now is, what can they get out of guys who I didn't just mention there. What can they get out of Jake Virtanen? What can they get out of Tanner Pearson? What can they get out of Brandon Sutter? What can they get out of Louis Eriksson?
I know what he's getting, a paycheck.
He's getting a paycheck. What's he getting back though? That's the question. So they're in an interesting year. I thought they had a good foundational year last year. I thought they had a lot of growth and development from some of their younger guys. How much more of a step forward can they take this year? That'll be the question. And can Jacob Markstrom continue to play like he did in net last year? Will he be good enough? Will Thatcher Demko be able to take some games off him this year? There's a lot of questions in Vancouver to me at this point.
For JT Miller, and this is the last thing I want to say here before I let you go. For JT Miller, he's a pretty solid player as a Rangers fan. I'll tell you that. And Vancouver needed him in their offense. Sure, I'm not questioning that. The one thing that really concerns me if I was a Canucks fan is that first round pick. Because the Tampa Bay Lightning were in a cap crunch. And Jim Benning went, hey, I want JT Miller. I'll give you a first-round pick for him. And it baffles me to a certain extent, right? Because JT Miller is a great player, and Vancouver's going to love him. But at the end of the day, it's a first-round pick protected in 2020, but if they move it to 2021, it's unprotected? You give that to a team that is in a cap crunch that needs to shed salary. You give them a first round pick. That is
Julian
very
Breezeball
concerning.
Was probably like, oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And all I can say for Vancouver is, well, I like the player in JT Miller. You better be good the next 2 years, right? You better make sure that it's not, a top 15 pick. You better make sure you make the playoffs so it's a later first round pick. Otherwise, that's one of those situations that we, kind of just saw in Colorado there where, gave up Matt Duchene, got a first round pick, and thank you. We'll just select fourth overall. Great.
For Jim, this screams desperation, right? For Jim Benning, because Jim Benning, I feel like, is in the hot seat, and if he doesn't get it done this season, then I would assume that he's out. So. And that's the sense, at least, that I get from Vancouver right now, because Jim Benning wouldn't make that deal, at least I wouldn't think that he would make that deal, if he wasn't pressing to make the playoffs this season. If he wasn't full steam ahead, make the postseason to potentially secure his job, then he probably wouldn't have made that deal. But because from what I understand, that he feels like he has to, he gave up a first-round pick to get JT Miller. It's like, all right, fine, you did that. Now what? Now what are you going to do?
Yeah, is that the move you make when you're a JT Miller away, you think, from contending for a Stanley Cup?
Sure.
Maybe. Are they a JT Miller away from contending for a Stanley Cup in Vancouver? I do not think so. So exactly. That's why it's a bit dubious. Yeah,
no, it's Jim Benning... And the reports were that the Canucks were looking into hiring Peter Chiarelli. I mean, is there a funnier duo in the National Hockey League than Jim Benning and Pete Chiarelli? Well, if you're not a Canucks fan, it's hilarious. If you're a Canucks fan, I'm really sorry. Dave, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you coming on. If there's anything you want to plug, social media or anything like that, the floor is yours, friend.
Yeah, hit me up on Twitter at Dave A. McCarthy. I'm sure if you disagree with my take on analytics, I'd love to hear from you, and we'll continue the disagreement with decency on Twitter. So at Dave A. McCarthy. But no, thanks for having me on, Andrew. It was a lot of fun. Enjoyed our debates and our discussion, and all the best with the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it. I'll talk to you again real soon.
Okay, man.
And that was episode number 55 of Chel Squared. Number 56 coming up next week. I'll talk to you then.